some people truly need no introduction, and Dr. Jordan Peterson is one of them. However, I will mention his new book tour, not so that you can buy tickets because it's already sold out, but maybe if you're early enough, you can catch the next book tour. It is truly an honor to have Dr. Peterson with us. From my understanding, he really didn't seek to become a public intellectual. He simply stood up against the forces of coercion and the abuse of language, and my goodness, we're all blessed for the fact that he was courageous enough to do that. And he has, I think, inspired not only me, but many millions of young people, millennials, Gen Zers around the world, by introducing them to the well springs of our civilization in a refreshing way. And for that and many other reasons, it's truly an honor to have you here with us in Palm Beach. And we will look forward to awarding you the inaugural Sir Roger Scruton Prize this evening. But for now, we're going to enjoy a wonderful conversation led by Ignat Solzhenitsyn, who is a tremendous author in his own right and a world-famous maestro conductor. And he won't be conducting our orchestra tonight, but maybe we can convince him to conduct the next orchestral performance we put on. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ignat Solzhenitsyn and Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Thank you very much, Marion, that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, Jordan. It's wonderful to see you again. And good afternoon, all of our esteemed guests here at the Common Sense Society Gala. So, I have some questions for Jordan, but just before I launch into that, and then we'll have some questions as you wish from you, our audience, and many of you also participating in such important ways in this conference. But just to remind each other and kind of remind our audience, why we come together or how we come together. It's really somewhat unexpected, certainly on my end, somewhat by chance, perhaps by providence, we should say. But at any rate, my father, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, author of course, many great books. Including One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, The Red Wheel, Cancer Ward, and The First Circle, and perhaps most famously, The Gulag Archipelago. And without going into the history of that book, which many of you will know, a couple of years ago it was being reissued for the 50th anniversary of its original publication. Actually, for the 50th anniversary of when he had completed it in 1968. And Penguin Random House contacted me to say, okay, we are thinking about having, in this new reissue of the Archipelago, to have a foreword written by Jordan Peterson. What do you think? And to be perfectly honest, I didn't think anything because I hadn't heard of Jordan Peterson yet. So I said, well, what is he going to say, or what does it look like? It's a monumental task. It's a very important task to attempt a foreword to a book of that historical significance and a book of such artistic power and so forth. So Jordan was nice enough through the publisher to send along his sort of a draft of what he had come up with, and both I and my brothers, who are also involved in sort of curating Solzhenitsyn's legacy as best we can, wearing that hat as best we can, we were so deeply impressed with Jordan Peterson's ability to get really to the heart of the matter, to the heart of what makes that book immortal, and to the heart of the insight, I think, that Solzhenitsyn offered. Not just the factual, highly important notion of setting the facts straight and saying these bad guys did these horrible things to innocent people. That alone, of course, deserves recognition. But Solzhenitsyn's real insight, recognized, I think, by Jordan and responded to in your foreword, was about that famous and profound line from part 4 of the archipelago about the line between good and evil. And the line between good and evil, says Solzhenitsyn, passes not between governments, not between political parties, but through the heart of every human being, through the heart of each one of us. And he says that line can oscillate and change during our own lives, depending on the ends to which we dedicate our lives. And that line can shift. And I think that what struck me about your foreword was precisely engaging with that notion and asking also the psychologist's question, why? Why and how could people do this to fellow man? And so that's that we could get into this more later, but that's how Jordan Peterson came to my attention, and we were so pleased to have this proceed and to have you develop and complete your wonderful, wonderful text, which I highly recommend to anyone engaging with Solzhenitsyn and reading that book for the first time or rereading that book. And your foreword is really wonderful. And the other connection is, of course, Sir Roger Scruton, who of blessed memory and recent blessed memory, and Sir Roger, whom I was privileged to meet at a young age and knew very little, but who made a deep impression on me in my teenage years, personally in meeting him and just listening to his wisdom and about many things in life, and of course the rich, profound, complex legacy he has left us to contemplate even as he is no longer with us. And I'd like to, of course, Jordan knows the writings and thoughts of Sir Roger very well, and you had an important meeting with Sir Roger at Cambridge, the other Cambridge, in 2018, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And I'd like to start off just asking you something about a particularly insightful and probing moment for me in that meeting, where Sir Roger lays out two approaches to life in the face of death. Something that we all have to face, something that's inevitable. So, okay, how do we deal with it? And he identifies what he calls a morbid approach. What's the use? Nothing matters. It all ends. With a creative approach, one that seeks to embrace our mortality, that thing that we fear the most, as actually a fundamental part of our humanity. And you responded that one must get at life. You said there's not much time to waste and there's many problems to solve. And you said that remembering our impermanency, quote, adds to life a seriousness that would otherwise be absent. Of course, already 2,000 years ago, Seneca had taught us that learning how to live takes a whole life. And it also takes a whole life to learn how to die. Christ reminded us of the transience of earthly life in this way: "Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?" So Jordan, in our daily life, how can we best avoid both that short-sighted heedlessness of living for the moment, living for today, and the paralyzing certitude that we are all born to die?
Well, it's good that we started with a warm-up question.
Easy one. A lunchtime question.
Well, I've been writing a chapter for my new book. It's called We Who Wrestle with God, and I was outlining This might be a long answer.
We're ready.
There's a strange scene in the gospel stories where Christ says something like, except as I be lifted up, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, there will be no hope for mankind. Something like that, which is a very, very, very strange thing to say. First of all, because he assimilates himself to a serpent, which is somewhat shocking on the face of it, especially given the historical connotations of the serpent, and then to specifically ally his mode of being, let's say, with that of the brazen serpent that Moses was called upon to create in the depths of his people's misery in the desert. It's very, very difficult to account for such things. It's very difficult to strip them in some sense of religious significance because they're so incalculably unlikely and incomprehensible that they're either insane or true. It's something like that. When Moses is leading the Israelites through the desert, they get torn apart by ideology, essentially. They're worshiping idols. It's the same word. It's the same thing. And you get torn apart by ideologies when you're lost in the desert. And you're lost in the desert after you escape from the tyrant. And that can be the prison of your own imagination. I mean, that tyrant that Egypt stands for, or is in Exodus, is a present and constant reality, which is the proclivity of our systems to become totalitarian in their overreach. And you might think, well, out of the tyranny into the promised land, it's like, well, then why don't people just give up the tyranny of their own imagination? And the answer is, because it's out of the tyranny into the desert. And it's not so clear that the desert's better. And, you know, we wonder about, in the Soviet Union, for example, nostalgia for the good old days, for the communist days. I read a book once that was the nostalgic reminiscences of Auschwitz prison guards. You know, right, the good old days. And so anyways, the Israelites, you know, they're kind of shell-shocked, right? Because, well, they had to, there's the whole slavery thing, and then they escaped under dire conditions, and as people do, and then they're out in the desert, and they don't know where they're going, and so they start to fractionate and argue amongst themselves, and Moses has to sit as a judge, which he does ad nauseum prior to receiving the Ten Commandments as a divine revelation. In any case, they're worshiping the golden calf and all of that, and God gets irritated about that and sends poisonous snakes in amongst them to bite them as an object lesson in foolishness. And the Israelites are somewhat stiff-necked, I suppose, like the Pharaoh himself, but eventually they get bit by enough snakes, so they think, okay, you know, enough snakes. They go talk to Moses and say, do you want to have a chat with God and like get him to call off the snakes? And Moses says, okay, we'll see what we can do. And he has a chat with God, and God doesn't call off the snakes, which would be the simple thing to do and would even make narrative sense. Now, if you're just thinking about the Bible as literature, okay, they learned their lesson. They're back in some semblance of order. Enough snakes. That isn't what happens. God tells Moses to make an image of a serpent and in bronze and to put it on a staff, and then to put the serpent on the staff in the midst of the people and ask them to come and gaze upon it. And then he says, if you gaze upon the serpent, the poisonous serpent, its poison will no longer affect you. And so that's real interesting, because instead of getting rid of the threat, God does something that fortifies people. And I find that extraordinarily interesting as a clinical psychologist, because one of the rich agreements that psychologists have come to across all the sub-disciplines of clinical endeavor, ranging from psychoanalytic to behavioral, is that if you expose yourself voluntarily to that which you are afraid of, that will cure you. And it is not because people become less afraid. That was the original hypothesis. That's wrong. That isn't what happens. What happens is they become braver. And so if you expose someone to any one of their fears, which is often symbolically associated with the fear of mortality itself, then they they find within them the reserves necessary to expand their personality to the point where they can approach that terrifying thing and prevail. And then they learn that that's who they are. And then they do it in all sorts of situations. So they generalize from it. And I would say that's as close to an established fact as any clinical truth that was derived in the 20th century can be, and perhaps only superseded by the simultaneous observation that absolutely free speech in the therapeutic context has a profoundly healing effect. And so the psychoanalysts do that in the form of free association, and the rest of the schools of psychotherapy do that to the degree they manage it in the course of genuine dialogue. And so in terms of death, well, the serpent is a representation of death. And the theory outlined in Exodus, buttressed by clinical data, let's say, and behavioral data, by the way, as well, not just clinical data, but scientific data supporting this claim that exposure is curative. That's a bedrock understanding. And it's also allied with the fact that that's literally how we learn, because we learn on the edge of the unknown. And that's the zone of proximal development, by the way. We learn on that edge, and that edge is right where we confront that which is intimidating and frightening to us at the rate that we find optimal. And you can tell when you're doing that because you're gripped by the sense of intrinsic meaning. And so the sense of intrinsic meaning itself puts you on the edge of fear. That's what it does, because that's where all the information is. So that's all pretty damn interesting. But then there's the assimilation of that story to the Christian enterprise, which is this weird allusion that Christ makes to the identity of his identity with the serpent. And I thought, I've known for a long time there's an idea that the hero rescues his father from the belly of the beast. That's a very, 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 very old idea. And it has something to do with the idea that if you confront what is in the depths, it's the Nietzschean abyss. Nietzsche said, if you gaze into an abyss, beware lest the abyss gaze back into you. If you gaze at what's darkest long enough, then the Father reveals himself. That's a way of thinking about it mythologically. But the crucifix is relevant in this regard, because we've been gazing at it for 2,000 years. And it's very strange behavior. If you just think about it psychologically, it's very strange behavior. It's like, what in the world are we up to exactly? Well, I was thinking about the role of narrative while I was working out these problems. I thought, well, when you read a narrative, you embody all the different elements of the narrative. It's very much germane to your father's work. And so if you read the Gulag Archipelago and you're not a guard or a trustee while you're reading it, you're not reading it, because part of the power of that work is not only what it was like to be victimized by this system, but what it was like to be an oppressor in this system, and how that was related to your own personal conduct through your proclivity to engage in deceit, right? Which is why I taught the work of your father in my psychology class, because I thought of him as one of the world's, the 20th century's, maybe he was the 20th century's greatest existential psychologist.
And so crucially for the reader, what would I do? You say identify with the guard, identify with the victim. Right, and then imagine you're fleshing yourself out while you're doing that, and you're exploring the darkness, that's for sure, because death is one thing, but the capacity to commit atrocity in the service of suffering, I think that's a more terrifying spectacle. To think of that as part of your own personal characteristics, that's a more terrifying spectacle than mere mortality. Could you talk about that more? Because you're right about that, if I'm not mistaken, you say the primary distinguishing characteristic, or at least a crucial distinguishing characteristic between us and the animal world, is that capacity to knowingly cause suffering.
Yes, I'll elaborate on that.
That's a fascinating thought. So that's...
Imagine the crucifix itself, which is a symbol of intense suffering. I mean, the Romans designed crucifixion to be the most intense form of death as a way of punishing political prisoners. And so there's that. And so it's the symbol of, it's not only the symbol of mortality, I mean, death's bad enough, but it's the symbol of terrible, catastrophic mortality. at minimum, but then it's not merely that, because it's embedded in a story that Jung, for example, regarded as archetypal. It was archetypal because it represented a limit case past which narrative could not extend. And so if you wanted to write the ultimate tragedy, so imagine that, you want to write the ultimate tragedy. Okay, so what do you need? Terrible death. That's good, but that's not good enough. Terrible death preceded by suffering, intense suffering. That's not good enough yet. Brought about by the betrayal of someone intimate, justifying that betrayal as a consequence of ethical action in the context of being a victim of the mob, when the mob knew that you were in fact innocent, and having the mob go far enough to prefer the political redemption of a criminal over you, even though they knew that that was actually a criminal and that you weren't, despite the fact that you were completely innocent and had done nothing but good your entire life. It's like, okay, it's a limit case, right? It's a limit case, like really, really. And that's interesting philosophically, because you could say that limit case narratives are sacred, and then you could ask yourself, almost by definition, you could ask yourself, well, what does that reveal about the structure of reality itself? And that's really the Christian question, is precisely that. What's the ultimate significance of this narrative? So you gaze upon the crucifix, let's say, but in the context of the crucifixion story, you can inhabit all the characters, right? You can inhabit Mary, who has to deliver her son to be broken by the world, which is what every mother has to do, unless she hyper-protects them, in which case she's the devouring pit of the abyss herself, and so there's no escape from that. And so that's, in some sense, the female equivalent of the crucifixion. And so you can play out that role in your imagination, and you can be Pilate, who asks, and this is germane to your question, what is truth? And you can be the mob, and you can be the person who accepts the necessity of the crucifixion and proceeds nobly to your death. All of that. Now, all of that's of crucial, so to speak, importance, because you are all those things. And that's a terrible thing. It's a terrible, terrible thing to realize in every possible way. Judas, for example, that's not me. It's like, oh, yes, it is. And that's that bit of darkness that your father wrote about that is still in every heart, no matter how good, is allied with this terrible capacity for the worst of atrocity and malevolence. And that's associated in Genesis, when Adam and Eve become self-conscious, when their eyes are open, they realize their nakedness. And that's often given a sexual connotation, and some of that is true, but that by no means exhausts the story. It's to realize your nakedness. This is why death enters the world at the same time, is to recognize your nakedness, is to recognize your mortal vulnerability. And to recognize that is to recognize your exploitability. And to recognize that is to recognize the exploitability of others. And so that's why the knowledge of good and evil emerges with the recognition of finite mortality, with self-consciousness. It's like, I can be hurt. I know that. I can act in a way that would hurt myself. I can exploit your vulnerability. It's like, that's evil right there, right there. And animals aren't capable of that. They're capable of brutality in an instrumental sense, because they're the carnivorous animals, for example. They'll tear a prey animal to pieces.
But it's not conscious, it's not premeditated.
It's also not done in the service of suffering itself. And I mean, if you're bitter enough, so why do people do evil things? Well, ignorance is one explanation, and generally the best one, but people who want to cause trouble for the sake of the trouble. Like, there is a delight in it, and that's what God accuses Cain of when Cain complains to him that his sacrifices have gone unrewarded. He tells Cain, essentially, sin crouches at your door like a sexually aroused predatory cat, and it wants to come in and have its way with you, and you opened the door and did so. And it's such a great rebuff in some sense. It's like, no, you put yourself in this situation, and it isn't even that you're possessed by something evil, although you are. It's that you brought it in, like inviting a vampire into your house, and then you entered into a creative relationship with it to bring forth more evil from that relationship. And if you're interested in that sort of thing, you can read the meditations of, for example, the Columbine high school shooters, because they'll detail that process which requires months of brooding, which is a very interesting metaphor because it's a birth metaphor. Months and months of brooding before you give birth to that sort of behavior. And so that's the entrance of evil. Back to the crucifix. Well, you might say, well, that leads to the ultimate realization that life is malevolence and suffering, and that you participate in it. But the Christian interpretation of that, which is stunning, is that that's not actually the end of the story. The end of the story is the death and resurrection. And that's psychologically accurate, because it turns out to be the case that you awaken most fully as a consequence of the most thorough contemplation of that which is worst. And so that's how you deal with death. It's like you look at it full on in all of its aspects, because that will call out something in you that can withstand that can flourish in spite of it, that can perhaps defeat it, whatever that might mean. And who knows what that might mean, because we have no idea what the limits of the capacity of humanity are in any final ontological sense, the function of consciousness, the purpose of our lives in any ultimate sense, who we are, who we could be, an even more important question. And who knows what we have to set against death itself. You know, there's a Christian idea that Christ defeated death, and you might say, well, what's with all the death? And I think the answer is something like, that's true, but we still have to do it, right? And that the kingdom of heaven is spread upon us and we will not see it. It's true. We have to awaken and see it. We still have to do the work, even though in some sense it's already been accomplished. It's a very strange philosophy of time, let's say, but things get strange at the deepest level of analysis. And so to come into contact with death is a shocking trauma in some sense, if you're naive, and we all are, at least at the beginning. And then to see that it so hurts you so bad and damages you, that's the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, right? The fallen state of mankind is partially a consequence of the emergence of our knowledge of our own mortality. It's a shock of cataclysmic epistemological proportions, and maybe of ontological significance, the first self-consciousness that arose in the cosmos itself, right? It's a non-trivial event if you give any credence to the idea that consciousness is of ontological import, which I think is a reasonable proposition. We all struggle with that, and the way forward is through, and that's terrible, but we have something within us that reveals itself only under those conditions. And we know, the psychologists know, that there's something, in some sense, almost magical about voluntary confrontation with what you're afraid of, because it not only does it teach you about what you're like, because you can observe yourself approaching what you thought you could never approach, which is quite the realization, but it's also the case that we've learned that if you put yourself in situations that you have not yet been in, so you challenge yourself, but voluntarily, then new elements of your genetic structure turn on and code for new molecular and biological structures. Like, there are literally parts of you that turn on that weren't on if you weren't there, which is partly why in the Chartres Cathedral you walk a maze, and it's divided into quadrants, and it's a symbolic pilgrimage, and in the pilgrimage you go to every corner of the world and end up at the holy city in the center. That's a pilgrimage. And if you walk the Chartres maze, then you walk through every quadrant. That's how it's laid out architecturally, at the center of the cross-like structure of the cathedral, and you end up in the center. And the idea there is that you have to go everywhere that there is. You have to take a detour through all the elements of life in order to awaken everything within you and to end up at the center. And the center is the point of the cross. It's the point of maximal pain, let's say, and suffering. But it's also the point of the most fundamental realization of your transcendent relationship with the Absolute. And I think that's just true. It looks like it's what that means, who knows, because we're finite and ignorant. We can never say what anything means in the final analysis, but we can certainly say that we've been celebrating that idea and developing it for thousands and thousands of years, and it doesn't appear to be merely an illusion, because people do get better if that's what they do. And then you have to also account, if you're trying to reduce it to something that shouldn't be taken seriously. You have to account for these strange narratives and their weird parallelism, and the fact that many of these things make sense, but only in retrospect, but they're built into the text. It's a very difficult thing to comprehend. And, well, so...
Jordan, let me jump in, if I may.
Yes.
Just you said something that really interested me just now. You said that exposure is curative.
Voluntary exposure.
So you say that it's not the simple recognition of death that allows us to deal with it, but it's being able to muster the courage. That it's our courage, it's bravery that allows us, according to psychology, anyway, that allows us to find.
I'd say it'd be faith that would allow us to approach. And courage might be the consequence. But you have to take a leap in. This is something religious people do.
But I want to ask you what courage means, because you've been coming at it from a couple of different angles for us, but something you said reminds me of Aristotle. Aristotle praising courage as certainly as one of the cardinal virtues, if not the crucial cardinal virtue. But Aristotle qualifies it, if I'm not mistaken, by distinguishing between a courage born of conviction and a courage born of simple compulsion. A courage that a soldier has to, when he's driven into battle involuntarily against his will.
Heedless courage.
Heedless courage versus a mindful, perhaps to use a modern term, a mindful courage. And what do you think? I mean, then of course Samuel Johnson has that amazing, most of you may know it, that wonderful, wonderful quote about courage where he says that courage is the greatest of all virtues. He says, because if you haven't courage, you may not have the opportunity to use the others. And that is so many things Dr. Johnson says really gives us pause for thought. So,
no, I don't,
really, in your view, how do you define it? How do you define courage?
I think part of it is being afraid of the right things.
That goes back to Aristotle, right?
People tell me
why we fear things.
People tell me all the time. They compliment me on my courage, and I think, I'm not exactly courageous. I'm just afraid of different things than you are. And so, for example, when this battle over compelled speech came out in Canada, I thought, well, I'm way more afraid of losing control of my tongue than I am of the government. I don't care what they do, because I took your father's book seriously. And part of that is live not by lies. Like, why? Well, because the road to hell is paved with lies. Actually, like, that's not some philosophical statement, some casual, certainly not in the context of your father's book, which was anything but casual philosophy. I believe that what he laid out was accurate. So why did Russia turn into a totalitarian hell and virtually engulf the world in a nuclear catastrophe? Because people lied. Each person. And when I was studying the atrocities of the 20th century, looking as deeply into them as I could, trying to embody all the players, and I realized that the lie was the cardinal catastrophe. I thought, well, I'm going to try not to say anything that I believe to be untrue. And so when the government said, you have to say this, it's like, what do you mean have to?
It's interesting, the idea of compulsion, because for Solzhenitsyn, as he writes, especially in his Nobel lecture, that lies and violence are perfectly and eternally intertwined, and that the lie cannot continue without being enforced by violence, by violent means.
Yeah, well, the lie,
vice versa, violence doesn't look good if it's just what it is, naked violence, and so it has to be covered up by lie.
Well, the lie has to be compelled in part, because if you lie, you act contrary to the dictates of reality itself, and then the consequences of that have to be buried by force, because Well, what else do you have? It isn't going to work. I mean, think of how could it possibly work? How could you possibly walk through a room without stumbling over the furniture if you refuse to admit it was there? Like, it's just not possible. And so people think, I can get away with it. And I think, no, you can't. And one of the things I saw very clearly in my clinical practice, and I would say in my private life, but well, I'll stick to my clinical practice, I never saw any person I ever talked to ever get away with anything they ever did, even once. The chickens always came home to roost. And you think, well, how can it be otherwise? You're going to warp the fabric of being itself with your lies, and you think that's going to work? Who do you think you are? And the answer is, you think you're that force that can warp the structure of reality with lies. And then if you think that through for a second, you think, just exactly who is that thinks that? And then if that doesn't scare you straight, it's only because you didn't understand the thought. So the prince of all lies.
Lie doesn't even pay. Doesn't even pay to lie.
I mean, someone asked me about this the other day. I said, for example, that I don't believe that exploitation and power pay either. And they said, well, you know, what about people who maintain successful dictatorships and so forth? And what about them? I mean, Milton knew perfectly well that you could rule in hell, and Milton's Satan was perfectly happy to rule in hell rather than to serve in heaven, and because he wanted to rule. And if you want to rule hell, go right ahead. And you do that through power and lies. And you will be a ruler, but the domain you master will be hellish. And one of the things, and your father's books helped me with this very much, his detailing out of Stalin's experience. There's a great movie recently called The Death of Stalin, which I would highly recommend, this brilliant work of utterly black comedy. I can't believe they made it. It's a masterpiece, that movie. I mean, Stalin believed that everyone was contemptible and lied all the time. And that's because everyone around him was contemptible and lied all the time. You know, and so he had generated for himself a self-reinforcing reality that if that's not hell, well, then I don't know what we would possibly mean by the term. And if it's not eternal, it certainly feels like it when you're in it, and so that's probably close enough. And in some sense it is eternal because you can visit it whenever you want, and you can always make it worse. And you definitely do that by lying. And so, live not by lies, I believe that was derived originally from Dostoevsky, if I remember correctly.
I don't think that formulation, I think it's
original? Okay.
Although I'm sure
I could well be wrong.
Could come to
although certainly that was a conviction that both Dostoevsky and Solzhenitsyn shared. It's like I came to believe, because I was interested, what motivated the Auschwitz Guard? Because I thought if I could understand that, then I could understand the opposite of that. But I needed to understand it too, because there were plenty of Auschwitz Guards, and so that's something I'm capable of, in principle, and maybe there's an antidote to it. And I came to believe that the antidote was not least to be found in spoken truth, and I really believe that. And so any attempts to, there's no rationalization for me that I can possibly conceptualize that would justify bending what I believe to be the accuracy of my thoughts or speech to the dictates of anyone for any reason whatsoever, because I firmly believe that that's the pathway to hell, and that's worse than death. So I'm not brave, I just know what to be afraid of, and that's what I'm afraid of, and afraid of not just for me, but for everyone, because it's there for all of us if we just want it, and there's plenty of evidence that at the moment we do, so we might get there, and that's not such a good thing. And so part of the reason that I've been doing what I've been doing to encourage young men, for example, is because I don't believe that the fundamental motivation of the human race is corruption and persecution and oppression. I don't believe that that's the spirit that animates the relationship between men and women. I don't believe that's the fundamental spirit that animates our culture. I do believe that there's a place where men and women of goodwill can meet and communicate and negotiate. I think the idea of the Logos is the most profound idea that the human race has ever generated. I think it is the antidote to lies and deception and corruption. I think that's true technically as well as spiritually. And I think that the way that that is best manifest is through truth in language. It's not the only way, and it's not all of the story, and I think your father is an unbelievably cardinal example of that. You know, it's what he did was impossible, and yet here we are. And so that's worth thinking about. I mean, he stood up under brutally dangerous conditions to his own peril and said what he had to say, and that helped knock over the Soviet Union. I mean, well, no one person can't do anything. It's like, yeah, wrong.
Well, that's it. And so there we have Solzhenitsyn's own life is a kind of a rebuttal of a kind of a rigid determinism of Tolstoy, who,
Definitely.
Of course, as a writer, Solzhenitsyn adored as much as Pushkin and as much as Dostoevsky, and in some ways more so as a craftsman, of course, as unparalleled craftsman. But this idea that what we do is guided by some kind of external, vague forces outside of our own agency, outside of our own being, is something that Solzhenitsyn learned to reject. By the way, I want to ask you about Marxism, because Solzhenitsyn, of course, is a famous example, along with Whittaker Chambers, such a noble example in this country, and many others in the course of these however many years now since Marx and Engels, as we were reminded this morning. But one of many who fell under its crude charms in youth, and certainly in the case of Solzhenitsyn, who was brainwashed, if you will, along with his whole generation, to in his case, to move away from the beliefs of his ancestors and even of his parents, his mother, who raised him in a Christian faith, and who raised them in traditional values, as they are now called, the kind of obvious values that you talk about. But Solzhenitsyn fell under that sway of I say crude charms because, again, on the superficial trappings of Marxism seem so appealing. For those who only consider them for a couple of minutes, sure, that sounds good, that sounds fair.
It makes sense. That's part of the problem.
It makes sense.
Catholicism doesn't make any sense. But
and it's easy. It's easy to say. It's easy to. We also heard this morning how easy it is to send those virtue signals. How easy to say, well, I'm on the good side, unlike somebody else. Was there a time in your life when you fell under that influence? When you thought maybe there's truth here? We know what a vociferous anti-Marxist you are now, an eloquently
Well, I worked for a socialist party when I was between the ages of 14 and 16, 17, something like that. It was when I was about 17, I had a roommate who's still a great friend of mine, and he was interested
at university or even
college.
before?
At college, when I first went there. I was working with the socialists, and they weren't Marxists exactly, because there's an English brand of Fabian socialism, which is much more associated, I would say, with Scandinavian socialism, and it's more rooted in labor unions and it has its own independent history. But in any case, there were a lot of admirable people working on the socialist side. My MLA, Grant Notley, was the only opposition member in the entire province of Alberta against a full slate of conservatives for many, many years. And people voted for him because he was a good man, not because he was a socialist. And I was fortunate enough to be friends with his wife, who was the librarian in our local junior high school. And she introduced me. She was the first person to really introduce me to literature. She introduced me to your dad's work. So I read The Life of Ivan Denisovich when I was like 13. I read Ayn Rand.
She couldn't have been a great Marxist herself then.
She also gave me Ayn Rand's books, and she said, I said, why? And after I read them, she said, why did you do this? She said, I thought you were smart enough to see through them, and which is quite a it's quite a testament to her intellectual integrity, right? And I read Orwell and Huxley at that time, and anyways, I think the reason that I found the socialist approach convincing was because, well, I had also lost whatever religious faith I might have had partly because I didn't believe that my minister, local Protestant church, was telling the truth when I asked him questions about evolution and its hypothetical contradiction with biblical writings. And he wasn't educated enough to know that there are many ways that those viewpoints can be integrated, let's say. And I didn't believe his protestations that he believed what he was saying. And it didn't sound to me like he believed it when I was in church. And so I was looking around for something else that was, I suppose, of some transcendental utility, which is not uncommon among adolescents who are looking for a pole star to guide themselves by. And, you know, the thing that the left wing has done so spectacularly, and then I would say in such a corrupt manner in the case of Marx, is to note the pain of inequality, which everyone should admit to. I mean, no one that I know of is ever pleased about their own good fortune, even when they're walking down a street littered with homeless people. There's an existential guilt that envelops each of us in an encounter like that, because you think, the part of you thinks, at least, there but for the grace of God go I. And it also compels you to reflect to some degree on the potential injustice of the system that has given rise to your relative flourishing. And so the problem of inequality haunts us all, and the sleight of hand that Marx pulled, which was inequality is caused by capitalism, seems quite self-evident on its surface, since those who are at the upper end of the inequality distribution have the money, and in our society they made it through capitalistic endeavor. Now, the problem with that approach, one of the problems with that approach, in my estimation, is that it completely underplays the benefits of capitalistic society, which are manifold, one of them being it is the only system we know of that has ever lifted people out of absolute poverty at such a scale.
And we heard the numbers this morning that were...
It's stunning. Well, look what's happened in Africa since Africa hasn't been riven to quite so great a degree by the Cold War processes that led to terrible decisions of governance. I mean, Africa, sub-Saharan African economies are growing like mad, you know, 13% a year in some cases. It's completely beyond comprehension, and people are being lifted out of poverty on a scale that's never been achieved before in the entire history of humanity. But inequality, well, fair enough, it is a catastrophic problem, and it can tear a society apart if the problems that it generates go unaddressed. And Marx's observation that money tends to aggregate in the hands of a few is absolutely spot on, but his insistence that that was a consequence of capitalism, that's just wrong, and partly because it understates the magnitude of the problem. We don't know how to play any economic games that don't have that as an outcome. And you know, the law that governs the distribution of money in a society applies to stellar masses. A small number of stars have all the mass. It's like, that's not capitalism. A small number of rivers have most of the water. A small number of cities have most of the people. A small number of hockey players score most of the goals. And it's unbelievably pervasive, this principle. And it's referred to in the Gospels, Christ says, to those who have more, everything will be given, and from those who have nothing, everything will be taken away.
The parable of the talents?
Yeah, they call that the Matthew
talents,
principle, right? And it's fundamental economic principle. And if the radical left-wing types were serious in the deepest sense about addressing inequality and its potentially cataclysmic consequences, the first thing they would do is stop trivializing it by stating that it's only a consequence of capitalism. And this is a big problem, because a lot of what's driving the culture war on its genuine side is compassion for the dispossessed. Misplaced though that may be, like over-exaggerated as a moral virtue though that may be, despite the fact that merely being compassionate can allow you to confuse yourself with someone truly ethical, regardless of all those codicils, there still is a concern with inequality that's driving the objection to capitalism. Well,
okay. Jordan, I want to interrupt you just to read some striking words from you that I'd like everybody to hear on that topic that struck me very much. from your coming from your scientific perspective, but you talk about those dispossessed, not just dispossessed persons, dispossessed stars that in the cosmos that are just getting on as best they can when the big stars take everything. And then you write this: inequality is the deepest of problems, built into the structure of reality itself, not just Marx's political theses, into the structure of reality itself, and will not be solved, says Jordan, by our presumptuous, ideology-inspired retooling. And something, to come back to my father for a moment, equally striking to me that my father once said about equality, liberty, equality, fraternity. He was speaking in France, and he had the audacity to take issue with that slogan. And he said, look, it's a great slogan. It sounds great. Those things we can all believe in. But he says liberty and equality, if you think about it, are mutually exclusive, and they're hostile concepts to each other. He says that liberty by nature, we talked about liberty this morning, and it's up here. Liberty undermines equality, and equality cannot be orchestrated or imposed without suppressing liberty. Yet, I think on a fundamental level, we on all sides of decency intuit that there is something about equality that perhaps there is a fundamental human striving for it. So how can we think about equality constructively? Not in terms of DEI, not in terms of especially that pernicious kind of
equity.
Yes, equality morphing into equity, with all the weird connotations, at least for me. But equality properly understood, is it enough simply to understand it in the moral sphere, that we are all born equal? We are all born equal in front of our Creator. Or
well, I would say,
how do we apply it to social?
I would say in some sense that's not a simple reduction of equality. It's an expansion of the notion of what equality consists of. And we are...
The idea that we're born equal.
Yeah, well, and in the sight of our Creator, let's say, which is an important codicil to that. It speaks to something like the transcendent worth of each individual. And this is not, again, a mere philosophical talking point. I mean, we believe in our free societies that the individual is sovereign, right? It's built, it's the bedrock of our political claim. It's the bedrock of the claim of our political system to legitimacy. It's the thing at the bottom. The individual is sovereign. Why? Because the individual is a dwelling place of logos. That's why. And that's true. So that's equality. And man, that you're the dwelling place of the logos. If you need a tool to get on with life, there's a good one. And so you set up your society to allow that logos to manifest itself free of coercion and force. That's equality of opportunity. And then you build a plethora of games so that everyone can win. But then you can have inequality within any game, but equality across the set of games. And that a sophisticated society, and the United States is a very good example of that. I mean, there are a lot of games you can play in this country. So there's an avenue for victory. Not everybody's going to be able to dominate the basketball court, but some people are going to be able to, and hey, they do pretty well. And not everybody's going to be a fluent and graceful singer or dancer, but some people, they can nail that, and so away they go. And part of what we want to do is to generate enough games so that everyone can play and win. And the United States, Western cultures in general, and other sophisticated cultures have done a bang-up job of that, and we can do more of it, and then we can have our cake and eat it too. And I don't see that as an impossibility, but it requires a sophisticated understanding of what equality means. And it also requires the abandonment of something like resentment, because you're mad because someone has more than you. It's like, yeah, but you have more than a lot of other people. And what about your stuff? Well, rich people have more money than me. And that's a claim that emanates from the left all the time, although it's never made explicit. I went to this evening event in LA at one point in a gated community, and everyone, this political firebrand came in and gave a woke speech, and everyone on the lawn was carping about the 1%. And I raised my hand and I said, I don't know if you guys noticed, but look around. Like, who do you think you are? You know, and to be in the top 1% in the US, you have to be very wealthy. And so if you're only in the top 5%, you might regard yourself as oppressed. But by historical, well, seriously, you know, I mean, Bernie Sanders, I think, has a net worth of $4 million. It's like, Bernie, that's quite a bit of money, actually. It's not Elon Musk money, you know, but you're also not Elon Musk, by the way. So, you know, and one of the things I certainly realized in my clinical practice was, because my practice spanned the entire spectrum of human ability, I would say, from people who were barely hanging on to the edge of the earth by their fingertips, you know, on an ongoing basis, and who had everything going against them that you could possibly imagine, and then a bunch more, to people who were thriving at the highest level of their complex enterprise. And one thing you learn when you deal with people across that spectrum, in any broad sense, is that certain people have certain advantages, but you have no idea what their burdens are. And, you know, you're jealous, you're a young man, maybe you're jealous when some, you know, 40-year-old drives by in his flashy Corvette with a hot blonde at his arm, and you find out, you look into it, you find out that she's a former stripper with meth problem, and her family is completely battered, and she's absolutely bloody hell to live with, and most of his money is so ill-gotten, and he's so hedonistic that he can barely maintain himself, and he's racked with guilt because of it. And, you know, from the outside it's this hedonistic dream, but from the inside it's indistinguishable from hell. And so be careful what you're jealous of, because you might get it. And so, and a little wisdom in that regard would go a long way. We all want what others have that we don't have, except for their problems. And right, and then we don't credit people with their problems either. It's, well, he's got everything. It's like, you don't.
Careful.
You don't know what people struggle forward with, and so don't be so sure. That's why I wrote in my first book that you should compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today, because the real level playing field is one where you compete with yourself, because you have your privileges and your advantages, and they're manifold, and you should atone for them by your proper behavior in the present. But you also have an equal share of arbitrary burdens that are tied with your mortality and your vulnerability and your own capacity for atrocity, your malevolence, all of that. That's on you.
And I think your point has been that those arbitrary burdens are ones that we tend to, all of us, from rich to poor, from black to white and the rest, we tend to exaggerate. We tend to exaggerate our burdens, and we tend to underappreciate perhaps our unearned, undeserved benefits. In other words,
well, we also, it's partly, and this is worth thinking about, because the radicals on the leftist side in particular have become very, very good at weaponizing guilt. And so they go after people and they say, what about your unearned privilege? That's like, and 30 people come after you and say that, and maybe you've been a little more racist and sexist than you should have been. And the answer to the first is, yeah, well, I do have quite a few unearned privileges, and I'm not sure what to do about that. And the answer to the second was, is probably have been a little more racist and sexist than I should have been, because, like, who can't say that in some fundamental way? And if it isn't racism or sexism, it's some other arbitrary idiot prejudice that you carry with you, you know, because we're kind of closed in and willfully blind. And then if you're a good person and you get mobbed like that, the guilt will do you in, and then that's no good, because you're demolished and you apologize, and then another mob comes for you and you're out of the game. But there's a real issue there, and the issue is, well, here you are with your advantages, and a lot of that was paid for in blood, and often the blood of innocent people. So what are you going to do about that? And the answer is, be better. That's how you atone, you know. That's how you pay for your privilege, is do the right thing, and do the right thing. And if you don't, you'll lay yourself open to accusation. That's the first thing. from others, and they may come for you, and you won't be prepared. But you also lay yourself open to your own accusations, right? Because you lay in bed at 3 in the morning and torture yourself with your conscience, and you can't shut the damn thing off, weirdly enough. And a lot of that is God calling you out on your misbehavior. You're a sinner, you've missed the mark, you've fallen short of the glory of God, despite everything that's been given to you. And if you don't think you'll call yourself out on that, well, you're hiding from the reality of your own inner voice. And it's no wonder you'd hide from that. It's a very pesky little thing, that, and it tends not to leave you alone. But it's a very important thing to realize, is that, every inch of soil we walk on is soaked with blood. And so how do we atone for that? And atone means at one. How do we pull ourselves together in the face of that and move forward properly? And the answer is, pay for your privilege with your virtue. And if you're hyper-privileged, it's like, get your act together. Because what is it? To those who have been given much, much will be demanded. And that is a psychological truth par excellence. And so,
Jordan,
passionate capitalism, that's what comes out of that, so to speak.
So many people have read your books, these last 2 books in particular, it seems, with application towards their lives. People are fascinated by what you're saying. And I think everyone here in this room has been listening with rapt attention to your thoughts and really to how you perceive your own life and how you advise others to deal with life truthfully. So I'd like to just move into that phase of our discussion and see, I already see a hand up. So let's start with that gentleman. And please, if you have questions, there is a mic or mics that are being brought to you.
Yeah, we're going to do this just a little differently.
Okay.
Myself and my colleague Stephen will be on either side. If you have a question for Jordan, and if you could come and line up here, please.
Well, first, on behalf of my sons and half the undergraduate men at Georgetown University, I want to thank you for all the work you've done for making them feel less homeless in the world. But then that brings me to my question, which is, so many of us who've watched you over the years have a sense that you're also on a spiritual quest for a return home as well, and that you come very, very close in so much of what you've done, especially in the last year or so, to, for lack of a better word, returning to Christianity. My question is this. From the vantage point of psychology, would that be possible? So I'm thinking of Feuerbach and William James and Nietzsche, all of whom approach this psychological or this theological phenomena from a purely psychological point of view, which is to say, from this side of the meniscus. Do you think you can get there on this side of the meniscus, or do you have to finally accept, and here I'm appealing to your Protestant roots, that there has to be a kind of divine eruption that moves the other way in order for you finally to have confirmation of what the deepest insights your psychology has given you?
Okay, I'm confused about the question, I'm afraid. So because there's a couple of questions in there, and I want to make sure that I answer it. I mean, the first part was a return to Christianity. That was the first part of the question. And
the first part is an observation that so many of us are making about your work, namely that you seem to be coming perilously close, but you want to get there through psychology. And I think of...
no, I want to get there through truth.
But your field is psychology.
Yes.
And the question is whether you can get there without accepting that there's a divine revelation that breaks in, and whether psychology...
I don't know how to accept that. Neither do the rest of us. I mean, people say, you can say that's true. It's like, show me.
Jordan, it seems to me I was very tempted to ask that question and also many other questions that we don't have time for, but it seems to me that if I may rephrase my own version, forgive me, of your question, which is that it's unusual and striking to hear a person who is not avowedly Christian as I think most of us would perceive that you are not publicly Christian, was not, nonetheless speak with such respect for religion, with indeed a determined effort to explain that so much, including psychologically, in us cannot be dealt with without, as you explained so eloquently in your Bible series, and you spoke about Moses today, the serpent, and of course you discuss Adam and Eve, and these are important central topics to you. So maybe another way of just asking that is how does that work inside you, and how are you able to maybe, while not being avowedly religious, and maybe that's just too personal to, but at the same time to have that respect, unlike most scientists or men women of that persuasion or of that discipline who say, well, that's not serious discussion. We're not talking about God, we're talking about psychology. Mm-hmm. How does that work inside you?
Well, I guess to some degree, I'll tell you a story. It bears on this, I guess, to some degree. I was in Washington recently, and I was there working with a group of people who have run the American Presidential Prayer Breakfast for like 60 years, and they're very well connected in Washington, and they consider it their mission to produce places of hospitality where people can meet their colleagues within each political party, but across as well, to provide that superordinate container that enables people of differing political opinions to meet as colleagues and hopefully friends, despite the fact that they think differently. And there is a Christian group, allied with the evangelical tradition, but departing from it in some important ways. They don't feel that their mission is to convert souls to Christ in a checklist sort of manner. And I'm not parodying that. And I was asked when I was there, I was talking to a group of young professionals, and one of them asked me a question, much like the current question, about my declared faith, and I answered it the same way I'm going to answer this question. I have a lot of Muslim followers. They'd be in the hundreds of thousands, I would say. I had walked through the New York City a month ago, and a Hasidic Jewish guy, young guy, came up to me. He said, "All my friends call you Rabbi." And I got a letter from a Hindu guy the other day that said that his friends call me Maharishi. And the Orthodox Christians are pleased with me for one reason, and Senator Mike Lee told me last week that the Mormons are pretty happy with me. And so that's good. And
it is good.
I'm not going to give that up by declaring my propositional adherence to a set of dogmatic beliefs, no matter what they are. And I'm not doing that out of lack of respect.
But the belief in one God is an absolute for you, or is subject to, as you say, the search for truth, a continuing search for truth?
Well, I think that we could lay out some propositions. I mean, I do believe that God is the summum bonum. I believe that's true technically. If you imagine that there's a set of transcendent values, goods, beauty, truth, justice, courage, etc., we could extend the list. They're all transcendently good. They're weapons against despair, not least. There's something that unites all of them that makes them good. Well, for all intents and purposes, that's God. It's the highest possible good. It's ineffable in some sense. We could all agree on the ineffability of the divine good. Is it real? Well, people ask me that all the time. What do you mean by real? And they think, well, you're evading the question. I said, no, you're bringing a set of reductive materialist propositions to the analysis of an equation that has terms equally mysterious on both sides. But that isn't the answer they want, because they want me to accept their definition of reality, which is reductive and materialistic generally, and say, well, that's reality itself. Is God a table? No. Well, then he's not real. It's like, have it your way. Well, seriously, because it's actually a discussion about what real means. And it's not obvious to me what real means. Pain, that's something that's obvious. Pain, that's real. And that's a strange thing, because pain is subjective. But you try to find me someone who doesn't believe that pain is real, and then put them in enough pain. Yeah, they'll act as if it's real, and then you think, well, pain is the ultimate reality, and that's sort of associated with the crucifixion question, and say, no, that which eliminates pain is the most real. You say, well, what eliminates pain? Well, what's good? And the sum of all that's good is the medication for catastrophe, atrocity, and pain. And maybe that doesn't exist, but, well, then we're doomed in every possible way. But I also see that people who accept that as a propositional axiom, let's say, the fundamental reality of pointlessness and suffering, all that does is generate more pointless suffering. So it's a contradiction in terms as a set of beliefs, as far as I can tell.
To be continued. More questions, please, if you wish. Over here.
Thank you. My name is Mike Lawrence. It's an honor to be here with you, Dr. Peterson, you as well, Mr. Solzhenitsyn. My question kind of goes back to what we started the conversation with about the line between good and evil going down the middle of every man's heart. And I think the presupposition there is that it's coming from somewhere else, that it hasn't always necessarily been inside of us. And I believe it was Nietzsche, Dr. Peterson, as you alluded to in a previous lecture, that it was externalized in the Piscean eon. In a sense, you know, Christ and Satan was externalized, and we brought them together in a sense, and that's where the line between good and evil is inside of us now. So I guess my question is, where does the future of morality come from? In a sense, if it's been externalized in the past, will it remain externalized, so to speak, as God?
Well, it will if we don't pull it inside us. I mean, there's also an idea that Christ took the sins of the world upon himself, right? And that's part of the nature of his divinity. It's a very strange. I mean, these ideas are very strange. What does it mean to take the sins of the world unto yourself? Well, I would say, imagine yourself in the position of an Auschwitz guard. Who enjoys it? Well, then that'll set up quite the catastrophe inside you, because now you've started to contend with that, right, internally. Because that's you. It's, oh no, really, that's me? No, what is it? Was it Samuel Johnson? Nothing human is foreign to me? I think that was Samuel Johnson. I might be wrong about that. But that's what that means, to take on that burden, is that, yeah, this is all this catastrophe, that's you. And that tears you into pieces, to take that inside you and then to try to contend with that in a manner that integrates across all that catastrophe. But this is partly why I like the Orthodox Christians' theology, certain aspects of it, because it concentrates to a greater degree than Western Christianity on theosis, and that is the notion that the imitation of Christ is to be total in some sense. It's like, is there something to frighten you if you want something to frighten you? It's like, you want to take the sins of the world onto yourself? It's like, you're either going to deal with them or they're not going to be dealt with, or you're going to externalize it. Where's evil? It's you. So that's convenient for me, but it's not so good for you. You know, and it is very easy to demonize, and it's a tendency that all of us struggle with, and it's especially difficult because you also have to draw lines, right? And distinguishing between drawing and lines and demonization is very, very, it's a constant challenge for everyone. And And then you might ask, well, how do we approach the truth in a way that brings about the proper future? And I would say a lot of that's through dialogue, dialogos, right? Is that honest communication. I would throw in a good word for Joe Rogan here, because some of you might be curious about him, and you should be, because, you know, he single-handedly moved himself from an absurd starting position in some sense to the most preeminent journalist in the United States. And he's done that entirely as a consequence of the modeling of civic discourse. That's his appeal, period. I mean, Rogan, in some sense, admits to his radical ignorance. He's certainly not someone who thinks he knows everything. And he's got a good sense of humor, but he models the dialogos process. And young people find that redemptive. And that's because it is. And the legacy media, in its death spiral, has abandoned that almost as a matter of principle. They're trying to tell the correct story, whatever that is, instead of investigating. The correct story is what emerges in the process of honest investigation. You don't know it beforehand. It's actually not computable beforehand. And that's actually why we have to think and talk. The truth emerges continually as a consequence of our living activity. And so part of the first question was a return to Christianity. Well, you can return to something and know it for the first time, in which case it's not a return, right? It's a new revelation of the same structure, and that's
recovery.
And an extension and a deepening and all of that. It's not merely, well, we had it right, here are the rules, we just have to return to that. It's like, no, we never had it right, and the rules don't encompass the future in any fundamental sense. It's a hard thing for conservatives to contend with, right? And for everyone, for that matter, because we still have to use tradition to guide us. But no, okay, for me, this is a psychological issue, right? And this is in large part as a consequence of the influence of your father's work. It's like I took the idea that the line that divides good and evil runs down the heart of each person seriously. It's like, oh, you mean that seriously,
You mean
sir?
that literally.
Yeah, you actually mean that. Oh, I see. And I just can't see how you can read the Gulag Archipelago without coming to the conclusion that you should quit lying. If you don't come to that conclusion, you're either willfully blind, malevolent, or you didn't understand what you read. Those are the options, because if you understand it, if you let that permeate you, you think, oh, I see.
He says in the book, if you are expecting a political expose, a conservative statement against communism, shut the book now, because it's not about that. Even though we start with that, but it's not about that. No. It's about look into your soul.
Right, and
what would I do?
It's a deep enough psychological investigation so that it borders on an investigation into the sacred. And I would say, if you go down into the depths far enough, psychologically, you end up in the sacred by definition. And I'm speaking not religiously here, but by definition. There is the depths, and the deeper you go, the more where you are is the religious domain. Even experientially, you say something moved me deeply. It was awe-inspiring. It was almost sacred. It's because you have an experience of the depths, and that can be a profound and earth and life-transforming experience. Like actually, not you have to believe this on faith, but actually, and the evidence for that is crystal clear. So
we're getting fabulous questions so far. We're running up against time, but certainly one more we can handle. So can we have
Thank you, Murray.
another?
Thank you. I have a question about legacy. And Ignat, I want to say you've done a beautiful job with your father's legacy. And as I listened to Jordan speak about the books that transformed you, one of them for me at 13 was your father's book. And so my question now, because Jordan, your editorial this past week was republished in all of my favorite conservative blogs about leaving the university in Canada, my question is your legacy. What's next for you in these next few years ahead? Because you have so much that you can continue to deliver for us.
Well, I think we're working that out as we go. My wife and I tried to get our act together before we embarked on this latest venture, and we're feeling our way along. you know, and I see what people respond to, and a huge part of that is encouragement. And that's something that conservatives really have to offer young people, right? And it's really worth knowing is because what they're being fed is this notion that any powerful ambition on their part is nothing but a manifestation of the corrupt will to power. And that precisely demoralizes the best of our young people, because the psychopathic types, it's like, you know, yeah, I already knew that. I know it's all will to power for me. What, you're going to accuse me of that? It's my modus operandi. It's not going to bother me. But if you're a young person with a conscience and you're continually bombarded with that message, especially if you're a young man, it's unbelievably demoralizing. And that's the point, because if masculine ambition is nothing but the corrupt will to power, then everything we can possibly do to squelch it, especially in its earliest forms, is morally admirable. It's like, no, it's not. It's quite the opposite, and it's based on a profound and malevolent mistrust, not least upon that. And so some of its encouragement, which is an upbraiding also, which conservatives can offer, strangely enough, as a medicine, because you wouldn't think that upbraiding people would be a medicine. But if your message is, there's way more to you than you're manifesting, and you know it, and that's a good thing because you're young and you've got to have something to do. And it isn't the case that the world will be corrupted by your presence, but that it will be corrupted by your absence. And people aren't taught that, you know, but it's true. You know, it's sort of associated with this idea of infinite number of games. Each of us is a landscape of infinite possibility within the structure of a game, and each of us can be a winner in that game. You play your cards properly. And the other thing that conservatives can offer young people, this is so cool, I think, and so part of it is adopt some responsibility, because in that you'll find the meaning that stops suffering from corrupting you. That's a good way of thinking about it. And that's a powerful idea. It's like you need something to offset suffering. Where are you going to find that? Responsibility. Really. To serve the people you love. That's meaningful. Really. And you need that, because if you don't have it, you will become corrupted by life's suffering. And so that's conservatives. They can just put a hammerlock on that, and you've got beauty and truth to offer, because as far as you're concerned, those are real, and the radicals don't think so. It's like, okay, we'll take beauty and truth. That's powerful. And then the next thing you have to offer, I think, is truth as adventure. You know, because imagine that you treat people instrumentally. I just want to get something from you. I've got some scheme concocted, no matter what it is. I might even want to, the Christians do this to me all the time. They want to convert me to Christianity, hypothetically, for my benefit, but that isn't how it plays out in the conversation. It's always manipulative with that particular question. The problem with that instrumental approach is that you reduce everyone around and yourself to a commodity in relationship to your narrow goals, and that's a big problem because you might be wrong. But even worse than that is you subordinate the great adventure of your life to your narrow desires. You certainly do that when you deceive. Instead, you say, I will say what I believe to be the case, and you take your chances. But it's you doing it because it's true. It's your truth. So it's actually you doing it. It's actually you. And so then that's your adventure. And the truth is an unbelievable adventure because you have to let go. You have no idea where it's going to take you, and so then there's a faith element underneath that. And this is truly religious faith. It's like, I am willing to go where the truth takes me. And there's a faith under that even, which is, I believe that truth serves the good. So you think, well, there is a good, and that truth serves it. That's an element of faith. That has to be there before you take the next steps. And conservatives have that to offer.
Of course, if truth is absolute, it doesn't matter where it leads us, we have to take that step, right?
Well, if it's allied with the good, no matter what the consequence is of telling the truth, it is the best thing that could happen. And this is a very hard, and we've learned that, would say in my family, painfully, because we've been attacked brutally multiple times, and we felt the ship had sunk 20 times, I would say, on the social front in the last 5 years. I mean, 20 is a strange count because there'd be like 20 major times when this might have occurred and then like 100 more minor times. And our observation has been, wait, it'll reverse. And of course, the waiting is the desert. It's like, yeah, it's going to reverse, but when? Because when's actually a big problem, but so far, it's always turned around. And in a way that, well, for example, I was parodied by I couldn't believe this. Somebody wrote a Captain Marvel cartoon, comic book, Ta-Nehisi Coates, a well-known leftist radical, parodying
Coates
me
writes
as
Captain Marvel cartoon?
Yeah, Red Skull, like, you know, king of the evil super Nazis. It was like being parodied in pop culture as Satan himself, like really, like one step removed, if removed at all. And when that first came out, it just about knocked me over, like literally. Somebody sent it to me on Twitter, and I thought, that's got to be photoshopped, and then it wasn't. And we were very destabilized by that because it was so insanely surreal and over the top, and then also quite the smear, you might say. And we put out a line of clothing and merchandise using the symbol, the Red Skull symbol, transformed into a lobster, and put on top of the symbol, instead of the Red Skull motif, we put clean your room and tell the truth, which was, you know, Red Skull says, clean your room and tell the truth, which was pretty funny. And we raised like $500,000 for charity. So,
Jordan, let me get to, before we run out of time, and I think we could all listen for indeterminate amount of time, but
well, I can talk for an indeterminate amount of time.
Our time is finite on this planet. We have one more question on this side, and then we will call it a gap in our day as we prepare for this evening.
Yeah, hi. Actually, it's a question for you. If I work in a family business, and I suppose I've lived under the shadow of my father my entire life, and he's a great guy. There's nothing wrong with him. He's a good father and everything. But finding my own identity in a family business with someone I see every day was interesting. So your dad wrote that book, and I was curious what your journey was like, creating your own identity when you have like this guy in your life that's like this big thing. And I feel like I relate to that maybe a little bit, so I wondered if you could speak to that.
I think I was very fortunate because early on in my life, I was, from the earliest time of my life, I was drawn to music. And I was drawn to music. First to listen to it, then to play, then to study, and my whole life's journey to this point has been in music. And so that field, like few fields perhaps, offers opportunity for limitless study, for enormous humility, which is gauged by the distance between what we wish to achieve and what we do achieve in our performance, in our daily work. And so that sense of belonging, that sense of mission, small m compared to my father, but nonetheless that sense of mission that every musician, I think, must have if we dare embark on that journey. That helped a great deal, to simply know that my life has its own value and its own path and its own challenge that will keep my hands full from the beginning. So I think I sensed that early on. Secondly, I could say that my father was a very, very easy person to to live with and to get along with. And he was not, you know, that some kind of caricature of an important man. Yes, he achieved great things, but what a horrible person, or what a tyrant in his domestic life, or he had, you know, 19 wives, or he beat up his kids, or whatever. And it does happen, and we know that, and we can still admire people like that, I think, because of other things they've achieved. But my father was simple, was respectful, was tactful in his daily life, and he certainly wished for his work to be respected, and his the main thing that in the short term he was after was the time and the space to write and to do his work. But at the same time, he was in a wonderful way respectful of the need of and the appropriateness of my mother and of the children and of us to continue and shape our own lives somehow. So I think that was, so I give the credit to him and to my mother, of course, goes without saying, in just creating or enabling. Is that a bad word? Sounds like a bad word these days, enabling. But enabling just a normal environment at home. And finally, I would say that it's interesting that conversation, I don't know how you find it, but your father is living, I trust, and I hope he's living and well. But that, if your father is such a seminal, important figure, then I think, or maybe that's completely irrelevant. In any case, my point is that conversation and that relationship, I find, continues after he's gone. Maybe that's more the case for me because his writings speak so powerfully to me, as they do to so many others. But in other words, when reading any author, one feels one converses with him, and certainly that's the case with Solzhenitsyn. But of course, there are other factors that are specific to that filial relationship. That, in other words, I feel in some, not in any kind of a weird way, I don't think, just in some subtle way that I continue conversations that he and I had, conversations that themselves were interrupted by months or by years of being in different places and pursuing pursuing our own lives. But in the end, one picks those up, and somehow, in other words, I'm hearing his voice at times as life situations come up, or interesting people come up, or a passage in his works comes up, and I wonder what he would say, or I can almost hear him continuing a thought, or maybe answering a question that I had that I forgot to ask him, or neglected to ask him during our physical time together. That in some, I emphasize in some vague, of course it's a vague way, but can continue. So those are some ways in which I think about having what it's like, to have such, to have such an important and famous artist for a father, and it's something. Yes, I think it's something that we cope with, and at the same time, it's an amazing opportunity to learn about him, and I think by extension, to learn about oneself. That's my perspective. Good. And we're out of time. Thank you. If I may just express my appreciation, and if I may be so bold, maybe on behalf of all of you, for the Common Sense Society, just to provide such an unusually thoughtful forum to discuss many of the things we heard this morning, and then now some of the even heavier things that we got into this afternoon, and equally my appreciation on behalf of Jordan to such an attentive and mindful audience, especially after lunch. Sometimes one doesn't want to think about much of anything, but it seems that all of you were so engaged and interested in these at times dramatic topics that we traverse over. And most of all, thanks to Jordan for being yourself, for being such an unusual, such a truly unique. We know from your writings that we all are unique, and we know that from other sources. But to see someone live their life, live his life in such a unique way, in such a honest way, and most importantly, to share it with others, that to me, parenthetically, in great art is what takes the great courage, is to share it, not just to hog it for oneself. That is impressive, that is humbling, that is educational, is instructive, and most of all, it helps us all, I think, to keep going day after day and to try to find out where it is that we're going and what we're supposed to do. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.